4, non-medical treatments. In this first lesson, I plan to offer you some background information on the importance and use of non-medical treatments for ADHD to help you understand why these approaches are critical to parenting your child with ADHD. Now, whether a child with ADHD is prescribed medications or not, non-medical treatments are typically needed. If you have made it this far in this course, you have likely come to the realization that ADHD has the potential of limiting a person's ability to gain particular skills, knowledge, and understanding. Their cognitive abilities notwithstanding, individuals with ADHD often have difficulty learning and applying skills in their daily life. Now let's use an example to illustrate. Many children with ADHD are impulsive, have difficulty attending to details, and don't seem to listen when spoken to directly. As a result of these issues and other symptoms, children with ADHD tend to be disorganized. They are unable to integrate conceptual information into meaningful groups to keep their thoughts and materials organized. Proof of this lies just behind the zipper of their backpack. A quick glance inside, and there is no doubt that these children have a hard time keeping their belongings tidy. Now, when this disorganized child is placed on medication, he may become less impulsive, he may be able to attend longer and will listen when spoken to. But he still doesn't know how to organize himself. Organization is a specific skill that must be taught. Not only taught, but it must be learned. As such, he continues to be at risk for misplacing papers and failing to turn in homework assignments until he gains the skills necessary to be organized. So as a result, almost all children with ADHD need non-medical therapies, whether they are on medication or not. In fact, according to most research, optimal treatment is actually a combination of medication, especially stimulant medication, and therapeutic non-medical interventions. Now let's talk about some of the different non-medical therapies for children with ADHD. Therapy for kids with ADHD tend to fall into 3 categories. The first category is behavioral. Within the behavioral category of treatment, the primary focus is on changing behavior. Usually, through the use of operant conditioning, behavioral strategies are used to reward positive behaviors and punish unwanted behaviors. Most parents tend to rely, arguably over-rely, on behavioral techniques for managing their child's behavior. Many parents want to simply know what consequences to use to stop a behavior that they want extinguished. There are several benefits and a few problems associated with the behavioral model. First, the benefits. 1. Parents, especially authoritarian parents, like behavioral strategies. Behavioral techniques give parents exactly what they want: consequences. More specifically, it gives them punishments. Applying consequences gives parents the satisfaction that they are actually doing something directly about a particular behavior. As such, the parent feels as though they are actively doing something to stop the behavior. Obviously, this is a very rewarding thing for the parent because they believe that they are doing something in the direction that they hope to go. Number 2, behavioral techniques are actually pretty easy. Though the intent is not to imply that behavioral techniques will always result in the desired effect, it is relatively easy to come up with consequences to behaviors. If the child does not eat his veggies, he doesn't get to have dessert. If he doesn't do his homework, he doesn't get to play video games. There is, in actuality, an endless number of consequences that are possible that a parent can use at any time. And while they are easy to identify, the consequences' ability to change the behavior really becomes the problem. So now let's shift to the problems with the behavioral model. The first is inconsistency. Inconsistency is inherent in the behavioral model. Let's say that for the unwanted behavior of talking back, the parent has decided to use the consequence of sending the child to his room. No video games, no toys, straight to your room, no pass and go, no collecting $200. Now, perhaps at home that consequence is somewhat effective. At least, as the parent would say, the kid is not getting away with it. Despite the usefulness of this consequence at home, what happens the next time you're at the grocery store and the child talks back? He can't be sent to his room, at least not until you get home, which could be hours later. What if he talks back to you at church or over the phone when he's at a relative's home, or when you're out for dinner? simply relying on consequences to manage these behaviors is not sufficient because all consequences simply cannot be used all the time. The second problem with the behavioral model is that consequences have to be relevant, and to be honest, they all end up losing relevance. The most powerful consequences are those that are meaningful to the child. If the child loves video games and looks forward to his time every day, taking away video game privileges could be a very powerful tool for parents to use. Conversely, if the child has a bike but has not been on it for 3 months, removing bicycle privileges is not likely to change the child's behavior. Makes sense, right? Now, what happens when what was a meaningful consequence to the child begins to change? What if video games are very important to him, but once the privilege is gone, he shifts his attention to, say, his phone? I know, take the phone too, right? Okay. But then, say he goes to play with his Legos. We take those away as well. What if he then starts reading a book or taking a nap? The point is, for many kids, consequences do not hold much meaning. Sure, you can take things away, but if the child is not bothered by it, there will be no change in the direction you're hoping. Sure, you are doing something about the behavior, which is, again, what most parents want, but is it really getting you where you hope to go? So relying on consequences has the limitation of requiring and having the expectation that whatever the consequence is meaningful to the child. Now, the third problem with the behavioral technique is that it doesn't really teach the children anything. Even when behavioral techniques are effective, the child is not really learning anything of value. What they know is simple. If I do X, I get consequence Y. As a result, and as suggested in the first problem above, this results in a somewhat restricted application of the strategy. To put that in psychological terms, the effectiveness of a strategy, such as this, is not generalizable. The child's understanding means that as long as consequence Y is a possibility, I cannot do behavior X. However, when consequence Y is not possible, behavior X is okay, right? Simple logic that is taught routinely to pigeons, rats, and even worms proves that children can learn this very simple connection. If worms can figure it out, your child can figure it out. So again, the third problem with the behavioral technique is that we're not teaching children anything. We're not giving them direct instruction of what is expected, why it's expected, and why they need to perform and behave in the way that we're asking them to behave. So to sum it up, while behavioral techniques can be effective with some children and in some situations, the problems associated with them leave us wanting for more, which leads us to the next category of non-medical treatments, cognitive techniques. These strategies are moving us in the direction that we really want to go. In fact, many of the strategies in subsequent lessons of this course would fall into this category. So let's start with a quick explanation of what I mean by cognitive. As I am sure you would assume, cognitive refers to thoughts, ideas, and understanding. In the context of this course, cognitive refers to the child's ability to make decisions, think critically, and manage reactions to the world around him. While behavioral strategies focus specifically on changing a behavior, cognitive strategies ensure that the child's understanding the expectations and masters the skills necessary to meet the expectations, and has the ability to recognize and use those skills when necessary. Now there's 3 parts there that are very, very important. A, that the child knows what to do. B, that the child knows how to do it. And C, the child knows when to do it. For the child with ADHD, this is especially critical. ADHD, among all the other things we have talked about in this course, is a disorder of executive function. Now briefly, executive functions are those cognitive abilities that help us plan, organize, filter unimportant stimuli, sustain effort, regulate emotions, manage our memory system, especially short-term and working memory, and self-monitor. As the name implies, executive functions are the cognitive skills that set the stage for almost every other cognitive process. Whether you are talking about learning or playing a sport, executive functions help us examine stimuli in our environment, differentiate important from unimportant information, integrate that information to understand how it relates to ourselves, then hold that information in our mind while making decisions. Only then do we act on that process and then evaluate our performance. So to put it bluntly, executive functions are critical. Now, given their importance, cognitive strategies work to build these skills. But let me use a quick example to differentiate more clearly the difference between behavioral strategies and cognitive strategies. In addition to being a parent and a psychologist, I'm also a coach. Every year, for more than a decade, I have coached either baseball, football, or soccer. Soccer has become my passion, and I am now a nationally licensed soccer coach. Sounds fancy, but it just means that I took a bunch of classes and put together a decent practice session for my instructors. Anyway, to the point. When I receive new players on my squad, I can immediately tell what type of coaches they had in the past. There are players who immediately, without looking, attempt to pass the ball behind the opposition defense so that they can attack and run behind and have a shot on goal. They have been taught in a very behavioral way, when you get ball, behavior X, kick it as far down the field as you can, consequence Y. When I ask these players, why do you do that? Except for the vague, so my strikers will try to score, they really don't have a valuable answer. These players do not understand the game from a cognitive perspective. There is no problem solving. It is all behavioral. Conversely, I teach my players how to look before they pass. We develop a system of options so that they can go to the left, right, or even backward if needed. My players are taking the game from a behavioral action-reaction perspective to one of planning, organization, and anticipation. I want them to understand why a decision is made in a situation, not just what to do when you have the ball. Moreover, I want them to understand why they need to make decision A and when they should make decision B. Again, I'm teaching them to understand so that they can make cognitive decisions while they're on the field. So that is what we should be doing with our children as well, teaching them why we want them to behave in a particular way, why we expect certain things from them, why it is important that they do what we ask them to do, and why it is important for them to ask us why. So, as I said, most of these strategies offered throughout the rest of this course are cognitively based strategies. They are not fast, and sometimes it will seem as though you are doing little to nothing about a particular behavior. However, if you understand where the strategy is going and how it will build over time, you will realize that it is definitely worth it. All right, now the last category is a category called parenting. I know, parenting, that's what you're here for. But let me explain a little bit more about my vernacular. All the strategies described in this course, of course, generally speaking, are parenting strategies. However, what I'm referring to here is really environmental strategies. The way we set up and arrange our home, physically and conceptually, can either work in favor of or in contrast to your goals with your child. I have met parents of 2-year-olds who would rather keep their toddler in a playpen than baby-proof the rest of the house. They complain that they have told her time and time again not to touch the vase, but she does it anyways. As a result, she goes into the playpen. The parents come to see me for strategies to get her to stop crying about being in the playpen all the time. What these parents don't understand is that the way that they structure their home is going to influence the way that they interact with their child and the overall development of their child. If you have a child with ADHD, you have to organize the physical structure of your home to fit your expectations. If you do not want your child playing video games for hours at a time, it may be a good idea to keep the Xbox in the living room as opposed to his bedroom. I know, it seems to make common sense, but many parents make these types of mistakes because it's easier. And the reason they make these mistakes is, like the parent of the toddler, they want the child to conform to their expectations, even when the child is unable to do so. Just as the 2-year-old is not able to refrain from touching the shiny, pretty, attractive vase, the ADHD child is not going to be able to self-monitor how much time he is spending on the Xbox, especially if he's locked away in his room. You must know your child and then organize your home accordingly. Just as it is important to organize the physical environment, you must also organize your expectations. There is nothing more challenging than when parents bring their child to my office, complaining of his behavior, focusing on all the things he does wrong, only for me to find out that the root cause is because mom has one set of expectations and dad has another. Mom routinely allows the child to do something and dad punishes him every time he does it. This is confusing to children with ADHD. Well, it's confusing to all children. It's really a nightmare to children with ADHD. Parents must develop a clear set of rules and expectations and then stick to them. Both parents need to be on the same page and, as best they can, respond the same way. In that way, the child receives a consistent message. And while it may be that the ADHD child takes a little bit longer to grasp the concept, he will eventually get it. But when there is inconsistency, there is really no hope or very little hope that the child will really gain the expectations that you're hoping that he'll get. This concept is explained in much more detail in the next lesson. Okay, so now that we have a general outline of all the lessons that follow, we will move on to specific strategies that you can use to manage your child with ADHD. Again, these strategies are critical whether your child is on medication or not. And as I mentioned previously, research consistently demonstrates that optimal treatment includes both medication and the types of strategies you're about to dive into. The following lessons are all organized similarly. I'll provide an outline of the concept, along with examples to illustrate the information and offer you some practical ways for you to implement the strategies in your home starting today. One challenge with this, of course, is that every home is different, and some tweaking may be needed. In such an event, feel free to write comments and ask questions on the discussion board associated with each lesson. I encourage you to post things that work well as things that need to be adjusted to fit your particular family. I envision this becoming somewhat of a village of parents working together to raise healthy children. Okay? Well, thanks. Good luck. Let me know how it goes. And I hope that some of these strategies that I provide are going to be helpful for you as you're working with your child. All right, see you next lesson.